Good morning. Welcome to today's 20-minute update. This is BCF's monthly series of live calls, Facebook live streams to give you an inside look at BCF, our initiatives, and the work we're doing here in Baltimore. Good morning to everyone. I'm Andrew Waldman, the host of the show, as always. And joining me today are BCF's Tiffany July-Lindo. Good morning. And Audry Motlagh-Harvey.
Morning.
Who is a social worker at Hopkins Bayview, and she also works in the Judy Center at John Rura Elementary. Before I get started, I just want to take a minute to thank our Civic Leadership Fund donors for making this call possible. It's because of our Civic Leadership Fund donors that we're able to do calls like the 20-minute update and many other things here at BCF. So thank you to all of you. Okay, so today we're talking about trauma, and specifically we're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences, which are also known as ACEs for short. ACEs is a term used to describe all types of abuse, neglect, and other potentially traumatic experiences that occur in people under the age of 18. ACEs have been linked to risky health behaviors, chronic health conditions, low life potential, and early death, so very serious issue. Throughout the call, we'll be referring to ACEs and other traumatic experiences. That we may include some discussion of violence or abuse. So if that's something that you're not comfortable with, we encourage you to maybe skip this 20-minute update and join us next month for our next call. Okay, so I want to get right into it. We talk about trauma all the time in the world, and I think there's a lot of definitions out there. So I wondered if you might be able to just define that before we get started here.
Sure. So trauma is the result of exposure to high stress environments that has an impact on the mind and the body. That makes an individual unable to cope with that distressing environment at the moment, and it can have lasting effects.
Great. Before we go any further into this, I just wanted to get a little background on both of you. Tiffany, you work here as our one of our development officers, and you have a lot of knowledge of this specific topic. I wondered if you might be able to just tell us a little bit about how you got interested and your background there.
Sure. So I am the development officer here at BCF. I've been here almost a year, but prior to that, I actually have a background in public health and in social work, and so I've used those to develop and implement trainings for educators in the city of Philadelphia, so that they are trauma sensitive and know how to react with their students in the classrooms in the moment when they see that something is going on. And to just have that lens and understand that this is not an excuse for why a student is acting the way that they are, but rather to be aware of what's going on so they can better address the issues.
What age do people start experiencing trauma, or what is the earliest age that someone might?
It can be any age. And so one of the things that is important to note is that I might be a year old, and later in life I may not have necessarily remembered what exactly happened to me, but my body might remember, or there are certain things that might come up that are triggering for me, and I may not understand why, because that's an experience I don't necessarily remember, but it can be any age.
And what are the sort of symptoms, or what does trauma look like when it does present itself to the world?
Sure. So trauma can look like a lot of different things. It really depends on the traits of the individual and the types of supports that are in place. But it can be withdrawal in certain situations. It can be hypervigilance. You can see anxiety. It can be behavioral outbursts. It can be a lot of different things and look very different for everyone.
We also hear a lot of maybe misconceptions about what it is. Are there any out there that you would want to flag for people? What is it not?
So in relation to children in particular, some people think they're bad kids, or they just are disinterested, or that, they come from a broken home, so that's why they act the way that they do. They haven't had appropriate training. And that's not necessarily the case, because again, everyone has different reactions, different ways, different supports. And also that it doesn't affect everyone the same way, so we shouldn't be looking for a blanket response from someone to say, this person also had that experience, but they don't act like that, so why do you act like that?
And sure. Audry, I wonder if you might be able to jump in here. Since you work every day at John Rura, what do you see as you work with those kids?
Yeah, so like Tiffany was saying, a lot of the times trauma is registered in the body. And so especially with children in the 0 to 5 population, which the Judy Centers concentrate on, we look a lot at their body languages. So like how their gestures, their posture, their eye contact, a lot of it is in attachment. and how they respond to us. So in the classroom, it might be a child that is seeking a lot of hugs or a lot of attention. Oftentimes, teachers or other individuals will label that as negative attention seeking, but really that child's looking for some sort of connection versus attention. Oftentimes, children also with slightest changes. So for something that would be easy for us, so for example, if science is going to happen next versus reading, and the children are used to that routine, a child that has a trauma background might actually have a bigger reaction, might start having poor attention or maybe even being tearful, things like that. And so as adults, we might think that's not a big change to their routine. But for them, it's a very big change for them because they're not as flexible. And we see that with children who have trauma, is the more trauma that they have is the less flexible and fluid they are in their behaviors and their social interactions with others.
Can you kind of contextualize the ACEs that affect kids in Baltimore City? Is there any sort of pattern there, or?
So lately, at least for the Judy Center at John Rura, we're seeing a lot of families coming from the border and the three triangle countries. And so for our viewers, that's El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. And so a lot of poverty happening, a lot of families that are trying to get their basic needs met. So we would think about like the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Do we feed them first? Do we give attention next? You know, where it's a big struggle. Clothing. Oftentimes, a lot of these families are coming to Baltimore, and once winter hits, it's a new climate for them. So
wow.
Understanding or even getting the basic needs of jackets or sweaters or things like that, as well as food. We have different food here, so it's very different, and especially for young children in pre-K and K coming into a school, that's a very big change for them. They're not
Sure.
used to our types of eating and our cafeterias. So those are a lot of things that we see, and as well as their journey from their countries to the border, their experience at the border, and then their travel to Baltimore and Southeast Baltimore.
Wow. So this kind of leads into my next question. And actually, somebody asked a question on Facebook, which was from John, who asks, once we identify a child or adult who has excessive exposure to ACEs, how do we build resilience? I think this leads into my next question, which is, okay, you know what this, what the source of this trauma is. What are the ways that you try to address that at Judy Centers and in your counseling work as well?
So part of my job is working with the teachers in the classroom and creating a safe environment. And so I work a lot with the teachers. Luckily, I have a great team that is very responsive, and Rura in general has a positive climate committee. So I would say our school is very open to addressing those issues. But the first thing is making connections with those children. Kind of bypassing, okay, you need to complete this paper and you have to do these things, but first just meeting the child where they're at and not forcing them into anything that they're uncomfortable with. So if they're okay sitting in the library because it's comfy and warm, that's okay until they start trusting you, because what we have to remember, especially children at an early age, and what we try to teach our parents and the teachers, is that they're lacking that connection, and so we need to teach them, and they've been miscuing a lot. So they're not really accustomed to eye contact or, you know, soft voices or any other things that we would think as a nurturing environment.
No, definitely am. And so something else that I usually stress with educators, also having an opportunity for children to express how they're feeling in the moment, and just to realize, like, you know what, Miss Tiff, I'm having a bad day today, or I woke up really grumpy. Like, being able to put a voice to that so they can also identify what's going on.
Right.
Because often what we see is that people will take things personally. Oh, this student is upset with me, because they usually come in very bubbly and, good morning, how are you? And today they're in a bad mood. That has nothing to necessarily do with me, but rather what happened before you got to school.
Right.
Or what happened last night. So.
Yeah, for sure.
When we talked prepping to get ready for this call, we talked a lot about the importance of physical space and in the classroom especially. what kinds of things, do you provide for kids in those physical space where they're with a bunch of other kids, there's a lot of distractions. How do you address that piece of it?
Yeah, so currently my teachers and I are working on implementing calm down corners. And so each teacher was able to build a box for those children. And we actually, I think last week we talked with the kids individually in each classroom and talked about how we can use that box for the children to take a break, and teaching the teachers and coaching them that the calm down space is a safe space for the child. So when they're overstimulated, or we might perceive them as hyperactive or not able to focus, that might be a good time for the child to take a break, because there's so many sensory things going on that the child is getting all these things constantly. And so creating a safe spot for the child in the classroom where they know, this is where I can express myself, this is where I can calm down, if I need help I can go here, is something that we're working on right now at the Judy Center to implement and support kids.
And for people who aren't really familiar with what a safe space is, it's not just telling a student, this is a place where you're going to feel safe.
Right.
They have to feel that they are safe in that environment. So that's from your own body posturing and your tone, and sometimes even the colors that are used in a specific space. So the calm down corner being an example of one. And for student knowing, like, it is okay for me to get up from my desk and to take a moment to be in this environment and then come back to what's going on.
Yeah.
So.
Great. So I got another question. I just want to pause real quick and let everyone know that